The new age of AI is upon us. Art, automated. Finances, integrated. Fights, instigated. And today, I'm figuring out my own way within this new era of the 21st century. For I will be the first self-startup AI company that will become a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. My journey begins now.
On today's video, we're going to be teaching you how to get 500 free Robux using ChatGPT.
Alright. Gotta film a quick preface real quick for everybody. I am not an expert on this topic. I explained later in this video, I made it as a video diary, but I don't think that does enough justice to kind of serve as a forewarning. So I figured I'd make this really brief intro. I hope it'll be brief. I am not an expert. This is a personal video diary of kind of like a checkpoint of how much I understand now. I am sure that there are many assumptions that I make, many kinds of claims that I have about this topic that might not be completely accurate. I encourage everybody to do their own research if they are genuinely interested in this. And I mean, if anybody is watching this at all, please feel free to call me out on where I'm wrong. The point of this is to learn. The point of this is to kind of grow for me, not necessarily for others, although I hope that it can be helpful. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to make sure was clear before getting into the meat of the video. Alright, the mic has to be here, apparently, to sound decent. When I started college, ChatGPT was completely in its infancy stage, and everybody was kind of scrambling to figure out what they could do and how they wanted to use it. Students were almost immediately violating academic integrity left and right, and professors were just trying to keep up at that point, and eventually decided to cave themselves and start using everything for their own homework assignments. And then at that point, it was just a big pointing, oh, you're doing less than I am fest of everybody just partaking in academic AI slop. And hey, I can't sit on any kind of moral high horse. I was definitely there, abusing the shit out of my own GPT model, using it as a teaching assistant to explain to me something as simple as the difference between a list and a dictionary in Python. Give me a break. It was my second semester as a freshman. So I was just, I mean, come on, like everybody was, but ultimately by the end of that year, or even in the middle of it, it got me thinking about how AI works, why it works, and, you know, what principles fueled it. And most importantly, how the hell was I going to be able to get a job if it was able to do everything that my major is supposed to teach me to do, except quicker, and, you know, you don't really have to pay it. So like all good academically inclined college students, I of course decided to postpone this question until after I graduated, and now with enough free time to essentially use TikTok as my full-time job, I'm gonna figure out exactly what it is that makes AI tick. So the general goal of this video or of this project is to serve as kind of like a little video diary of everything that I've learned. I think I've at this point made a lot of random videos on my channel kind of documenting my weeks, and you know, I figured it'd be cool to make something a bit more cohesive, something that I wrote a script for. So we can start with chapter 1, statistics. So I graduated from the prestigious Party School of the Pennsylvania State University with a bachelor's in computer science and a minor in mathematics. And as you might expect, I'm quite the baller when it comes to statistics. I mean, could somebody who was bad at statistics tell you that when he read his class distribution, he was at the bottom 10% of the passing grade? Just as a heads up, my job applications are still out there. But in all seriousness, when I first was introduced to statistics, it was really difficult to understand. Theoretical events such as Bayes' theorem were not easy for me to grasp because it felt completely intangible. Calculating the likelihood as to whether or not it was going to rain because I was wearing green just did not really make much sense to me, or to anyone else. It's a horrible example of statistics, but it's kind of how I felt like things were shaping up to be in the middle of class. But it's because of that initial lack of understanding, I really delved deep into it to understand everything that there is to know about it. And for me, machine learning has no topic that is more important than statistics. As a preface, I won't be teaching how statistical tools work or which techniques they use in every case. Some of them I will explain for the sake of the video and making sure that everybody knows what presented code does, but I'm not going to be going in depth. I'll include resources to learn in the description if anyone is interested in pursuing certain concepts or topics further. But for the sake of not making this video like super long, I'm going to try to be as concise as possible when explaining. That aside, statistics is pretty much the study of probability and likely outcomes, and learning as a concept ties together with this hand in hand. I mean, you can think about it. When you're a kid, you're a blank slate, a fresh canvas, but the one redeeming factor that you and everybody else in this world has is that you're able to learn from experience. You're able to kind of see what is a mistake and what's not a mistake. What can you continue to do and what can't you continue to do? We all figure this out through gathering events that happen in our lives and subconsciously kind of creating a probability table as to what might happen if we were to take certain actions. You see, probability as a naive definition is just counting the number of times something happens in an event and the number of times that that event happens. For example, I come home and I turn on my computer. How many times out of every time do I turn on my computer do I play League of Legends? And by counting that and determining how many times that I do, you can get an exact numerical measurement of how much of a degenerate I am on a daily basis. So if we live life and we take action, the outcome is what we remember. And the more times certain outcomes happens as a result of repeated action, the more we can learn to correlate those two events. I mean, you can test this yourself with word association. For example, if I were to say a fruit like banana, and I were to ask you what fruit immediately comes to mind, there's a select group of you that will likely think of something like an apple or an orange. Or even better, if I were to say apple, you would possibly think orange because of the saying, you know, apples and oranges, stuff like that. But it's a learned behavior, a pattern that you've recognized. The same way that if I were to say Taco Bell, a select group of you would think about blowing up your living room toilet at 3 a.m. as a result of that chicken chalupa you decided to eat because you were feeling extra moss that night. So when it comes to the topic of machine learning, statistics is the most important thing. Chapter 2, Statistics in Machine Learning. Okay, now lock in with me for a moment because this is important. In fact, it's so important, I'm just going to be reading off the script so I don't miss anything. So statistics is the foundation of learning, but why does it matter in machine learning beyond what I've already discussed? Well, to put it simply, you and I can understand events happening and probabilities through our experience. Though statistics can be helpful at creating a generalized predicted outcome, we don't necessarily need it to learn. Machines, on the other hand, neither have the understanding or capabilities by themselves to understand anything. For example, why as a collective society we repeated the numbers 6 and 7 for 2 years straight, although I doubt even if we put our best anthropologists of the modern age on that problem that they could figure it out either. The mathematics of statistics allows for us to boil down events into numerical encodings so that a computer can understand the outcomes and why they might happen. I put quotations around understand because it's not like a machine is actually understanding anything. Famously, there is a thought experiment about reasoning and logic called the Chinese room argument. It postulates a scenario in which a person is placed in a room with cards in a language they do not understand. They're fed inputs and give outputs based on the instruction that they are given in their language. However, they're never told what the cards they are given mean or the meaning of what they're responding with, and therefore they lack the understanding of the language or the fundamental logic of grammar within the language. I bring this up because it's actually pretty integral to understand why machine learning works at all. Statistics allows us to make educated guesses. These guesses are byproduct of repeated patterns that we find in nature that can be fed into a computer as a way to derive numerical estimations as to the likelihood of connection between a cause and an outcome. For example, the Pearson correlation is one of the simplest measures to determine a likelihood as to whether or not two variables are similar enough to be considered dependent on each other. Modeling techniques used these days or within the past 50 years use concepts of statistics to attempt to make solid predictions based on agglomerated data. At its core, models would take in data and labels for those data to find patterns and make educated guesses as to what kind of scenarios might play out for newly given data or outcomes. And in order to do so, it would need to use techniques that derive from statistics in order to make these guesses and predictions. Concepts may be as simple as just trying to understand the variance or standard deviation from the mean. That way you can make conclusions as to what certain events would happen based on what's most likely to happen. And it can get as complex as using data sets that take in hundreds or thousands of parameters and determine which ones are most important by using algorithms to filter out parameters with low correlation values or low mutual information scores and more. The foundation of math that builds models is built on many different important concepts within the field of mathematics. However, I think most paramount of them all is statistics, because it boils down events to numerical values that a computer can interpret and use so that we, as people, can rationalize patterns and outcomes. Chapter 3: Models and Techniques. So, now that we understand making predictions based on statistics, what can we do with that? Well, funny that you would ask, because I spent the last week making this. I'd say it's pretty cool code, personally. This entire piece of code essentially goes over techniques and processes of machine learning that allow me the leeway to kind of explain exactly what does what. There's a chance that you clicked on this video to learn more about the most popular concept of today, which is the Skynet eldritch horror of AI. Alleged to be born out of hell itself, its tendrils are data centers, and its followers are copy-paste tech bros that have the personality of a blank cardboard cutout. But you don't need to understand the complex nature of large language models to understand the general concepts as to why they work and what they run with. Gather, infer, predict. That's what I could say you could dumb down all machine learning to. Each step has its own techniques and algorithms, and here I'll explain what I believe to be the most important ones and what they use. Gather. Gathering is arguably the most important part of any kind of machine learning or learning, period. You think about how to poison a well for any kind of model, you start with the data, because it's the water that the model lives off of. Good data precedes any good investigation, and because of that, we have no shortage of techniques that you can use to gather data. Instruments for gathering are widespread. YouTube keeps tracks of viewer analytics, TikTok will monitor things like hashtags that get the most attention from you, food companies will keep track of what sells the best in every month, and schools may keep track of certain kinds of things like student demographics. Data gathering can be done with web scrapers or looking up online files, and in this modern data era, it is the gold mine in which companies build advertising campaigns, marketing techniques, and roadmaps to success. Specific techniques of how to gather data vary widely depending on who you are and what you prefer. But generally speaking, you can follow the same rules that you would whenever you're trying to research something. If you can measure it yourself, go for it. No data is better than the data you can gather yourself reliably. Otherwise, go to reputable sources where you can find data from. And if you can't find anywhere reputable, just gather from as many places as you can so you can find trends even in data that may seem extraneous. Step 2. Infer. Inference of data, in this case, means how much information do we actually gain from the data. Say we've marked what kind of information we're looking at and we know what we're trying to predict. How useful is the data that we measured into coming conclusions about what we want to know? This is where we come to use statistical analysis tools that I was mentioning earlier. Things like correlation values, variance, chi-square distribution, mutual information, principal component analysis, and more are used in order to do what is called feature selection or data preprocessing. This is a step before actually training the model, and it matters because it allows for us to come to reasonable conclusions about certain features or variables that may not provide substantial or sufficient information to use computing resources for. Keep in mind this step is sensitive. A wrong numerical inference can create cascading effects that could harm a model greatly in its evaluation metrics. They say no matter what, even if a feature does not have a strong correlation, unless it literally has no correlation, you'd ultimately be losing some information. The question is whether or not it's inconsequential enough for you to ignore. And finally, predict. Okay, I kind of lied. There's like 4 overall steps, but just 3 sounds better. So I'm gonna say that it's 3. I'm gonna say it's the 3 that I mentioned. But realistically, before you get to predict, you have a step of modeling. Modeling is kind of a fancy way of saying throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. I mean, not actually, but kind of in a sense. Obviously, it's not a great definition, but elaborating from there helps you kind of get a better picture as to what it exactly entails. For my own understanding, I decided to categorize modeling into 2 main groups: function-based modeling and tree-based modeling. These aren't really widely accepted terms, it's just an easy way for me to understand it, just for myself. But as a forewarning, you probably don't want to use my exact definitions. At least if you're taking a test or something. I doubt your professor would let you get away with function-based modeling as some kind of subcategory. But essentially, if we were to look at it individually, function-based modeling is like modeling through Excel. You create an estimated function with the data that you have so that if you were to put in some kind of value, say x, y, z, etc., it would be able to give you a predicted outcome based on that function. It's like in 3rd grade when you were first introduced to making graphs. You used your own brain to calculate an equation based on predetermined rules like where was the x-intercept, where was the y-intercept, what kind of slope does the function have. In fact, if you were just given 2 points, you can make a fairly accurate approximation function that you could use to then plug in any x or y input to get a deterministic output. That's a prediction. That's a function prediction. You put in the parameters, you get an output, you've now predicted what that output would be based on your rough estimation. Tree-based modeling is based off something called decision trees. It's fairly complex to explain mathematically in terms of how it works and how we build it, but it's easy to understand conceptually. Data that you are given can be encoded to be a bunch of individual decisions, and at the end of each of these decisions, there's a prediction that you can get. Think back to those shitty online quizzes from BuzzFeed that you would fill out. Each answer likely had a numerical value tied to it that would range between certain areas, and by the end, you would get a category of what you were or who you were, depending on where exactly you scored. So ultimately, you use data that you gathered and inferred in order to train a model that can make predictions for you. And once you model, you need to evaluate its correctness by using things like data splitting, which is where you have test data that you already know what the output of is, so that you can see whether or not your model is really great or whether or not it's somehow predicted that you have a strange brand new fungal disease that needs to be quarantined by the CDC as soon as possible. Boo! Bam, better camera quality. So I got rid of the original ending of this video because I thought it was really bad. That is literally the only reason. It didn't make any sense. By this point at the night when I was recording, I did all the recording in one take. It pretty much all turned to gibberish. Very cringy to like edit, and all the jokes kind of like fell flat on their face in my opinion, so I got rid of it because it was also misinformative. I think by this point in the video there are like overall like radical assumptions I make, but those assumptions were just straight up just nah, you can't really justify that. Yeah, but this was a lot of fun. I'm gonna make another video maybe sometime soon. I'm working on a new project. I'm gonna record as I go instead of like record at the very end. And then yeah, this was fun. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it if you did.